and welcome to the podcast that doesn't find pockets of space, but does hold the ball up really well. It's the big man up top.
Yes, it is. Hello, Ed.
Hello, Joe. How are you?
Yes, very well, thank you. Are you keeping well?
Oh, very much so, very much so. Especially after this last weekend, Joe.
Oh, it's always a special weekend, isn't it?
FA Cup third round, you can't beat it. So we're going to do a bit of chat about that. But we should start with some trivia, shouldn't we, Joe?
Well, let's do it, Ed. It's time for Bible Ballers.
Have we still not come up with a better name for that?
No,
yet?
I think it's pretty much set. 23 episodes in, Ed.
I know, isn't that amazing?
That's pretty wild, isn't it?
There's been more episodes of the big man up top than there has been game weeks in the Premier League this season.
It's impressive. It's impressive, isn't it? But yeah, we're sticking with Bible Ballers. This is Guess the Player with a Difference. The player will share his first name with the name of a book in the Bible. Is it still 9-4 to me?
9-4 to you, yeah. I feel like this is going to sort of go out of football score territory.
I think so. We're getting into cricket score territory.
Yeah, very much so, very much so.
Well, are you ready for this week's question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Joe. I feel like we need some kind of handicap system.
Okay, this week your question is, which former big man up top turned actor joined a Premier League club from Lyon and scored 40 Premier League goals across 3 clubs?
I've got to be honest, I'm struggling to think of footballers turned actors apart from Vinnie Jones or Eric Cantona.
Yeah, they're the big two, aren't they?
And to be honest, Eric Cantona was probably a fairly decent shout if it wasn't for the fact that, you know, there isn't a book of Eric.
The whole Bible book thing.
Yeah.
You've fallen short of that before, haven't you?
I have. I'm going to have to give this one a big think, Joe.
Yeah, I'll give you some time to have a think about it, Ed. Not too much time, mind.
No, just a little bit of time. We'll go on to talk about the FA Cup in more detail, but away from the FA Cup, there's been some footballing news, hasn't there,
There's been
Joe?
some big stories this week. Let's start with Everton, shall we?
Yes, David Moyes has returned.
He is back.
What's the vibe from Everton fans on this? Are they delighted? Are they devastated?
I mean, are Everton fans ever happy?
Well, yeah, good.
I don't know. I think it's a bit of a mixed reception. I think there's still a little bit of bitterness from when he left. You know, he was the chosen one, famously, to take over Sir Alex Ferguson at Manchester United. Didn't go too well.
But he really did sort of outperform expectations at Everton for a long time. Was it 10, 11 years, something like that?
Time.
You know, so he's very much one of the greatest managers of their recent
history.
Absolutely.
He established them as a top 6 club, really, in his time there. And they've yet to reach those heights since he left.
Exactly. So I mean, I'm looking from the outside, I think it's probably quite a good move.
Yeah, I don't mind it at all, actually.
We have had Graham Potter going to West Ham.
I also think this is quite a good appointment. I think Graham Potter has been biding his time, rightly so. You know, he got sacked quite early on into that contract, long old contract with Chelsea.
He had a few appearances on Sky Sports.
He did. He tried his best to get a job. And he was linked with Everton. I think a bit of this, because I do think West Ham haven't really conducted this in the best way.
Paul Lopetegui was basically hung out to dry for 2 or 3 days, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Taking training when everyone sort of knows you're not going to be in the job in the next 48 hours.
And Potter was pictured with the sporting director in a hotel lobby, of course.
Classic. Absolute classic.
There's some weird stuff going on at West Ham with their sporting director. You know, the last 2 managers, Lopetegui and Moyes, have both banned the sporting director from the training ground.
Right.
I mean, that must tell you there's a problem.
You are not allowed to be here. Not just interfere. You're not allowed to even be.
And this is the guy that's meant to be in charge of all sporting operations at the club isn't allowed on the train. So there's a problem there.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how this goes.
And fresh from being sacked from Stoke after 3 months, coach Narcis Palak goes in as the first team coach at West Ham under Potter. I think he's landed on his feet there, hasn't he? Yeah, exactly. I'd completely missed the conversation around Kyle Walker.
Yes.
So fill me in on that.
So after City's game, I think there's been a bit of chat already this season that Kyle Walker he's past his peak.
Yeah.
He's 34 now. He's not as quick as he used to be, and that used to be his thing. He's kind of lost his way a little bit, and after their victory at the weekend, Pep said in his post-match interview that Kyle Walker has requested to leave Manchester City and finish his career abroad.
He has had a great career. done very well at City. It's always a good thing to know when it's time to finish things, when is it time to leave. Otherwise, you get, players who sort of stick around and end up making too many mistakes and ruin their legacy.
Become a bit of a hindrance, don't they? Yeah. And there's talk that he's in talks with AC Milan to move there, which I think would be a good move for him. I think Saudi Arabia is probably in the conversation as well.
Yeah, the MLS, all that sort of stuff.
So we'll see where he ends up.
What about the Carabao Cup, Joe, in the week? It was with all the FA Cup chat, we sort of missed that we're at the business end of the Carabao Cup, aren't we?
Which we all love. Quite the entertaining week, actually. Not so much on the pitch, but off the pitch, Ed. There's been a bit of conversation, a lot of complaining, I would say.
A lot of complaining from managers. Tell us about Mikel Arteta.
Yes, after their 2-0 loss to Newcastle at home. Now, I think he's been a little bit set up here by a journalist.
No. Surely.
He was asked about the ball used in this game, and I think his quote was, "This ball's a bit lighter, which is why we hit it over the bar so much," which doesn't look good, does it?
Like one of those flyaways you get at the beach.
Yeah, and he said this isn't an excuse, but the ball's different.
Right.
Sounds a bit like an excuse to me.
Sounds a lot like an excuse to me. Yeah.
So they lost because of the ball against Newcastle. Now, Ange,
this was the first time that it was experimented with VAR announcements, wasn't it?
We saw this in the Women's World Cup, I believe, a couple of years ago, where the refs told the stadiums what VAR was doing, which we've all been asking for, right?
Yeah, and also, as a fan of the NFL, you see this in American football all the time. The refs have a little mic pack and they can press a button on their belt and they speak to the whole stadium and they say, this foul was committed and it was by this player, and so this is what's going to happen now.
Yeah.
And that's just part of the game. Now, it feels weird to have that in football, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It feels overly dramatic, but equally, we do want that feedback from referees.
We do. What happened on Wednesday, though, is Dominic Solanke scored a goal, and he was offside. They showed it on the screen. They showed he was offside. The ref did the whole VAR signal, and then his mic went live. He blew the whistle down the mic. That was just the loudest whistle you've ever heard, piercing.
Oh, gosh.
And then he said, after review, Dominic Solanke was offside, no goal. Which we all knew that's what happened. He gave us no additional information to what we already knew. Yeah. So I don't really see what it's achieving.
Yeah, it feels a bit strange. And also, it feels odd to be experimenting with this at quite a crucial point in the Carabao Cup. And I think that's what Ange was unhappy about. Not the thing in principle, let's say, but it was the fact that this was the game they chose to introduce it for the first time.
What is your favourite FA Cup memory?
As a Stoke fan, I have to say Stoke's run to the final in 2011, which included great moments like the home win against West Ham in the quarterfinals. Danny Higginbottom scored direct from a free kick to send us through. An absolute pile driver under the wall to send us to a Wembley semi-final where we beat Bolton 5-0.
And then what happened in the final?
And then we lost 1-0 to City in the final. And it was a very forgettable FA Cup final.
I honestly don't remember it.
Yeah, exactly. But I love the giant killing, and I loved Lincoln City's 2017 run to the quarterfinals.
Yes, famously.
Powered by big man up top, Matt Reed. Matt Reed, an acquaintance of mine.
Yes.
Really good guy. He was a big part of that Lincoln City team that got to the quarterfinals in 2017. So what about you, Joe? What are your sort of go-to FA Cup memories?
Well, yeah, I think the obvious one as a Liverpool fan in my lifetime was the 2006 final, of course, against West Ham. The 3-3 draw with the Gerrard pile driver in the last minute.
Oh, what a goal that was.
A great hit. I remember that game vividly, watching it with my dad. He'd bought me a little Galaxy muffin, actually, for the FA Cup. And it was a great time.
FA Cup final.
Have a muffin.
Galaxy muffin.
And it worked. And I think for a few FA Cup finals following that, we had a Galaxy muffin.
Just in
case. It kind of became our own FA Cup tradition until I moved out.
That's lovely.
I miss those days of FA Cup finals and Galaxy muffins.
Mr. Rivers, if you're listening, maybe send Joe a muffin.
Please do.
This year.
That would be lovely.
We're going to touch on the magic of the FA Cup a little bit and where we've seen that this weekend. But I really want to hear from the listeners. I want to hear your FA Cup memories. So please get in touch. Send us an email to podcasts@ucb.co.uk. Tell us about your FA Cup memories for your team or just for another team. Let us know which ones are baked into your memory. What are the big talking points from this weekend then, Joe?
Well, I think let's start with Tamworth against Spurs, shall we?
Very much so.
Yeah, so this was kind of the highest profile game, I think, of this week. The potential for the giant killing was large.
Was it 96 places?
96 places
between the two teams?
Between the two teams. You know, you had all the build-up. I was watching the news the other day, Ed. I don't often watch the news, but it was on, and they'd gone to your friend of mine, Tommy Tonks' place of work.
Yeah, and what does he do?
Now, Tommy Tonks makes sandwiches.
Of course he does.
They showed him going to his warehouse at 5 a.m, preparing the sandwiches, opening up his van. You know, you have the montage of him working and like
getting the tuna mayo out.
And all of that. And then at night he goes to training.
Yeah, they train twice a week, don't they, Tamworth?
Yeah.
And obviously the whole squad is filled with players who have got full-time jobs outside of this. In fact, the manager has only recently just gone full-time
Has he really?
As the manager. Yeah, I believe he was for a while part-time manager and part-time college lecturer or something like that. So
it's quite a sweet gig.
So he's sort of, but he's recently gone full-time as the manager.
Congratulations to him. Anyway, this game was actually slightly delayed as well, Ed, because they were fixing the net.
Yeah.
But Tamworth actually took Spurs to extra time.
They did.
Which no one saw coming.
Yeah.
Spurs put out quite a strong team here. And I think you saw the lineups and you thought, there's probably going to be a goal in the 10th minute and that'll be it. Very much not the case.
No, Tamworth had a really great game and it wasn't just Tommy Tonks and his long throw.
It wasn't. They had other things going on.
That was a big part of it, but they created some really good chances. And at the end of the game, it wasn't Tamworth holding out for extra time. They were pushing for it. And
they nearly won it, didn't they?
They nearly won it right at the end. It gets into extra time. Spurs end up scoring 3 goals, but the first one was an own goal. And it was really, really unfortunate. Very much left having lost with their heads held high.
And there was almost a bit of embarrassment from Spurs, wasn't there?
Yeah.
When they scored the goal, they were a bit like, it's taken us 100 minutes.
It's taken us 100 minutes and an own goal to get it. Shout out to Hayden Hollis, central defender, who not only cleared one off the line, but also did a Maradona spin at one point. Yes. And apparently Ange said something to the effect of he can get in the front door at Spurs with moves like that, and there was so much FA Cup magic on display.
Yeah. Now, we spoke last week a little bit about cup replays, of course. That this season they're not a thing, and we had a really good chat about the financial benefits of replays. Go check that out last week if you didn't get a chance to listen. But obviously, this game went to extra time. It was 0-0 at full time, and traditionally that would take it to a replay at Spurs' stadium.
Yeah.
Obviously that hasn't happened this year, but I don't know if you're familiar with Kieran Maguire. He's a bit of a financial guru around football. He worked out that should this have gone to a replay, Tamworth would have got around £800,000 from 50% of the gate receipts from TV coverage. That's a significant amount
for a club like Tamworth. It's the kind of money that keeps them afloat for years, doesn't it? Really sort of bolsters the coffers
100%
for years to come.
So I think there's a bit of a feeling of almost injustice against Tamworth.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is worth saying that yes, there were lots of fixtures that sort of we all just want to get out of the way. Nobody's interested in a replay, but for a club like Tamworth, a replay there would have been massive to their survival. And as we said last week, losing replays is purely to benefit the ultra elite teams. It's so that they can have one less fixture in the calendar. I think it's something that really we have seen only one occasion in this year.
Of course.
But one occasion where for one club that would have been absolutely massive and they've missed out.
And how sad would it be that if we look in 10, 15 years' time, if Tamworth don't exist anymore.
We were talking about FA Cup memories, and I mentioned Lincoln City's run to the quarterfinals in 2017. They needed a third round replay to get past Ipswich that year. So, it's not just the financial thing, it's setting up a potential magic run towards later in the competition. Anyway, other results in the FA Cup. Brentford lost at home to Plymouth, didn't they, Joe?
Yeah, so this really was the only kind of cup set that, we talk about, a lower league club beating a team in a higher division. Plymouth played away at Brentford. Brentford played a bit of a rotated squad, ended up bringing on some of their big hitters like Johan Wisser, Brian Mbuemo in the second half. But Plymouth nicked it at the end, Ed, in the 82nd minute.
Huge.
Absolutely massive. Great goal as well. Still managerless, Plymouth, after sacking Wayne Rooney a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, showed real spirit in this game, grabbed a winner, and they've been rewarded with a home tie to Liverpool in the next round.
I know. How are you feeling about that? Because I've got to be honest, that's got cup set written all over it.
It could be, it's a potential banana skin, but we'll see. We'll see. Arsenal and Man United played out a draw. This one went to penalties, didn't it, Joe?
It
did. The first half of this game was pretty drab, Ed, but it really picked up in the second half, thanks to Diogo Dalot, who got sent off in around the 60th minute with a horror tackle, Ed.
Would you describe it as a horror tackle?
Well, maybe not a horror tackle, but an idiotic tackle, shall we say.
Yes,
second yellow. But it really lit the blue touch paper of this FA Cup tie, and it turned into a real ding-dong classic Arsenal against United game.
And how will Arsenal feel? Because obviously they had the midweek defeat in the Carabao Cup and couldn't really do the job against 10 Man United. No, so they'll be disappointed.
The thing with this as well, Ed, is that obviously United are the FA Cup holders, and to commemorate that, they use a different ball. They use a gold lace mitre ball, which I would suggest anyone that's used a mitre ball, they don't float.
No. It's the exact opposite.
It's like kicking a rock.
So did Arteta say anything about this?
He didn't, but we're still waiting.
Yeah,
we're still waiting.
He may well have some things to say about that one.
Now, it's not been a great week for Arsenal. On Wednesday, Ed, it's the North London derby. This is a huge game for Arsenal.
Two sides that are very much below par currently, I would say, in terms of form. So it could be a classic. It also could be absolutely terrible.
It could. I think it's actually an ideal game for Arsenal because they're going to be up for it. So we'll see what happens to them. Speaking of United, two really good performances this week.
Yeah,
from them.
It's worth touching on goalkeeping heroics in this game as well, Joe.
So their second goalkeeper, Bayan Dia, Turkish goalkeeper. He's played a couple of games for United. Not been the most inspiring signing. He had quite a bad game last time out in the Carabao Cup. Even in the first half of this game, he looked a bit sketchy. He had a few goal kicks that went straight out of play. In the second half, really turned it around, saved an Odegaard penalty. It was a good penalty as well.
Yeah.
It was right in the corner. Great save. Made a couple of really good saves as well in open play. And then penalty kick heroics.
What a way to endear yourself to your team's fans by being that goalie in that penalty shootout that makes all those heroic saves. Do we think football fans are fickle, Joe?
I think they might be, Ed.
He's gone from villain 1 minute to the best goalkeeper on the planet.
We're very fickle people. I think there's a lot of recency bias goes on.
Yeah.
I even think about this with Darwin Núñez. He's not had a great season.
No.
But it's easy to forget last season he had a very good return, goals and assists, while he had over 20. But a few bad games and suddenly fans are on your back.
Speaking of the big boys, City and Liverpool particularly looking quite dominant, I thought.
Yeah, I think Accrington Stanley showed up.
Yeah.
Particularly the first 20 minutes. They had a few chances. Even throughout the game when they were losing, they had a few chances. And they really gave Liverpool a good game.
Even at 2-0, it didn't look amazingly safe, did it?
No, they hit the bar. And the game is very much still in the balance. Less so can be said about Salford City.
Yeah, obviously there was a lot of interest around this game. Salford City predominantly owned by the 92 Foundation, which is made up of ex-Man United legends, Scholes, Giggs, the Nevilles, etc. And so there was obviously going to be a bit of needle in this one, but Salford did not turn up. I think I turned it on after a few minutes and City were already 1-0 up.
Yeah, I switched over to the Leeds Harrogate game after 9 minutes because I just thought this isn't going anywhere. And I think there's a few results like this. Liverpool won 4-0, City won 8-0, Chelsea won 5-0, Brighton won comfortably, Newcastle in the end won comfortably after an 8-minute scare.
Yes.
And I think it's becoming more and more of a thing that Premier League clubs just have so much quality through their squad that cup sets are less of a thing.
I think this is a really good point for us to touch on, is that we all love the tradition of the cup, and we've been complaining about the fact that replays have gone away and all that sort of stuff. And there's other things that fans can complain about. It used to be that the FA Cup final was the centrepiece of the football season. It isn't anymore. No. They're scheduling Premier League games alongside it. Kickoff times are being moved, all that sort of stuff. And, there can be a lot of nostalgia around the FA Cup. I feel like, years and years ago, every third round, there'd be 2, 3, maybe even 4 giant killings. You'd have a lower league team beating a Premier League team or whatever. And it seems like it's becoming rarer and rarer. I have no evidence to back this up. But
just vibes based.
Yeah, vibes based. But were the old days really that good, Joe? That's what I want to know.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, my gut feeling is that generally speaking, the FA Cup was better years ago. And I know that football has to change, but there feels like there should be some things that are sacred, some things that should not change, Joe. Sure. It's even around the little things like FA Cup final is where we sing Abide With Me before kickoff. And we still do that. And I find that a really precious tradition that we have. And I do sort of wonder, how long is it going to be before it's seen as a relic of the past?
Sure.
But I remember, I'm very happy to admit, Joe, that when I was at Wembley, I shed a tear when we sang Abide With Me. It's a beautiful, beautiful moment.
It's okay to admit that.
I will, Joe. I don't mind, But and there feels like there are some things that should remain sacred. This weekend was great. The FA Cup third round is always great, but it feels like it wasn't quite as good as before. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a danger here of almost romanticizing the past. I think the game of football is changing. I think the way we consume it now, I think we look at it much more of an entertainment than a sport. I think, we want to be entertained. We want to see high-scoring games.
Yeah.
And I think there's a danger that we look at the past as the glory days almost. I had a quick look before we started recording at past results between Arsenal and Manchester United, because I think you think FA Cup, you think the glory days, the 90s, you think Arsenal United games, don't you, as the best games, right? And so many of them were 1-0. There was 0-0s, there was 1-0s, there was 1-alls, there was low-scoring games. And I think our expectations of what we want from football now are so different to back then.
For me, it's all about the quality of the games. And I think that's the thing, is you could have a game that was 1-0, but it was on, I don't know, it was maybe on a muddy pitch, it was windy or whatever, but it was two teams really being aggressive, attacking football. That's what I mean. It's not necessarily a high scoring thing. I'm very conscious this is playing into a stereotype of me as the older one of the two of us, Joe, but I do have this sense that football doesn't feel quite as good as it used to be. And it's still great. The product is great. The skills are obviously, the technique and all that. Players are better than they've ever been before. I get that. But there's something that's being lost in the magic somewhere.
What do you mean by good, though, when you say it's not as good as it used to be?
Well, this is it. There's a sort of a quality that's missing. An X that I can't quite put my finger on.
Sure.
That we're now losing out. We're losing some soul, Joe. We're losing some untouchable thing is being removed from our game, and I don't know what it is.
Well, I think there's a few things. I think the bar is higher of excellence. I think you look at someone like Pep Guardiola's come in and he's changed things, right? Like, whether you like it or not, Pep Guardiola has changed football. It's a product now, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think
the gap between the teams at the very top and the smaller teams has never been bigger. Yeah. There is a gulf in class, and obviously there's the conversations about parachute payments into the Championship and all that sort of stuff. The Championship is doing great in and of itself, but there is such a gap between some of the non-league clubs in the Premier League now. It's borderline impossible. Like, when was the last time you saw a game of football on a muddy pitch? Like, you don't see it. And that's what you would have got back in the day is, can you imagine that Spurs team trying to beat a team on a horrible muddy pitch? That's the sort of handicap that these smaller teams got. And now it's on 3G and do you know what I mean?
Sure. I think you're right. I think, and particularly looking the past couple of seasons, clubs have come up from the Championship to the Premier League and they've struggled. They've gone straight back down. I think we're going to see more and more of that.
The Bible is full of moments that talk about how important it is to maintain traditions.
Yeah.
Again, we're not talking about FA Cup replays here, so, for context. But Isaiah 46:9, the Lord talks about remembering your history, your long and rich history. There are several occasions in Scripture where God tells his people to remember specific events and people in a kind of put this stake in the ground to remind you of what happened before.
I think that's a really good point, actually, that, we talk about nostalgia, looking back on the past. That's about looking at what God has done in your life to encourage your faith, to see what God can do and what God is going to do in the future.
Jesus, as well, during the Last Supper, made a whole thing of one of the core things of our faith is taking communion. Do this in remembrance of me. Remember what I'm doing. Don't forget this. Keep this as a tradition, as a sacred tradition. And that's why, Joe, I think we should still have FA Cup replays.
Well, it makes sense, Ed.
Do you think there's a point, though, where thinking that the past was the good old days, do you think there's a point where that can get damaging or can be unhelpful?
Yeah, I think there is. I think it can create an unrealistic expectation of how things should be. I think you look back in the past, the way we are as humans is we only remember the good things, right? We're talking about things like this specifically, and it gives you this unrealistic expectation of what you can do, what you can achieve, what players should be like these days. You think of the past greats, Pele, Maradona, and you compare them to players these days, and I think that's quite an unrealistic thing to do. So I think it can be damaging and unhealthy to always compare to the past.
I absolutely love this quote from Mark Twain. He may or may not have said it. It was written on my church's wall many years ago, nice. And so it's always stuck with me. But he apparently said, "Tradition is not wearing your grandfather's hat. It's buying a new one just like he did."
Okay.
So I quite like that, because it's this idea of, there's a way of honouring tradition, but that's not just sticking in the past. And I think that, maybe there is a way that football can grow and can change, and yet we can still keep the magic and the spirit of what we're doing.
Because I think tradition speaks a lot into identity as well. Without tradition, we don't have ties to the clubs we support. There's a reason we support those clubs, and that goes way back into our childhood or growing up or whatever. And if you're not looking back at that, then you don't really have that tie, that connection, and a way to move forward. And I really love that point you made earlier on about communion. The church I go to is quite a modern church. There's not loads of liturgy, kind of standing up, sitting down kind of thing.
It's the exact opposite of the church I go to.
Sure. And, you have quite an extended time of music at the start. You have a talk that being honest, can sometimes turn into a bit of a TED Talk.
Great.
But on Christmas Eve, we decided to go to midnight mass, Ed.
Lovely.
At Lichfield Cathedral. And it was that moment of, oh, wow, this is why we believe in this. You have communion, you have liturgy there, you have a lot of things that might make someone newer to faith a bit uncomfortable, or, there's a lot of singing in there that you're not used to. And it was that moment of, wow, these traditions exist for a reason, and they're actually quite powerful things, and remind you of why you have this faith, what it means for Jesus to be born into this world. It was quite a powerful moment for me.
That's exactly what I'm experiencing now in the church I'm in. I used to go to a very modern church, had a wonderful time there, had some incredible experiences, met some wonderful people, was under some great leadership. But then I moved location and had to move to a new church, and started going to a 900-year-old Church of England church with lots of liturgy. And it was very alien to me. But over time, and it has been years, I have seen so much beauty in it. And you're right, it can be off-putting, maybe to some, But for me, at this time in my life, it's been a wonderful experience because I've been able to see the beauty in all of this. And there's a reason that this church has existed for 900 years. And it's, we're sort of very much standing on the shoulders of the people who've gone before. And you realise, yes, tradition is very important. It doesn't mean that we keep it at the expense of moving forward as the Big C church, but actually that there's some really sort of special things about those sacred traditions as well. We've had a little bit of correspondence, Joe.
Have we?
Yeah. Now, this was, I must admit, this was from a few weeks back, and I've just been a bit sluggish with it. But we put our podcasts on YouTube. So if the YouTube. So if that's where you prefer to listen to your podcasts, we are on there. Search The Big Man Up Top. And just because I haven't been checking the channel, there'd been a few comments left over the last few weeks. And
let's hear them.
Well, there was just a couple that I wanted to touch on. From the Mark Gahey Rainbow Armband episode.
Oh, yes, we were nervous about that one, weren't we?
We were, and you know what? We had some really lovely feedback from people on it. And at Hear God's Word said, fair play to Mark Gahey in making a stand for Jesus. And at Mike Harrison 190 said, great job, Ed and Joe. Not an easy topic this week. Thank you for giving it a bash for us.
Oh, well, that's all we can do, isn't
and
it?
I just thought that's lovely. That kind of feedback is we really do appreciate it. So thanks, Mike. And yes, please do get in touch, leave comments on YouTube and Spotify, and most importantly, email us at podcasts@ucb.co.uk.
Well, Ed, I think you've had enough time by now.
Oh, I've barely given it a second thought, Joe, to be honest.
Well, usually you take about 5 minutes out to have a think about this. We don't have time for that today because someone wants a studio after us.
Yes.
So I am going to ask you the question one more time, and then you're going to give me the correct answer, and then we will wrap it all up.
Oh, dear.
Sound good?
No, it doesn't.
Well, which former big man up top turned actor joined a Premier League club from Lyon and scored 40 Premier League goals across 3 clubs? Do you want one of the clubs?
Yeah.
Stoke City.
What?
Yeah. Thought that'd throw you.
I'm really, really struggling with this.
He scored 1 goal for Stoke on loan.
I was thinking Hesse. Do you remember him?
Yes, I do.
But I think he only played for us. I don't think he played for another Premier League team.
And also, what book of the Bible is that?
Well, I was wondering
if it was Jesus.
No, I was wondering if it was like Joshua or something.
Okay.
No, so I don't think Hesse. Obviously, Eric Cantona, but he didn't play for Stoke. I've got Ida Johnson in my head, but I don't, Book of Ida.
Yeah.
I'm going to go for John Carew.
You're correct, Ed. Now that's a bit outrageous. You've had 5 minutes.
No, I haven't had 5 minutes.
I've given you a lot more clues than I should have.
Yeah, but we've talked about the handicap before. I think you need to give me.
Okay, I'll give you that. Anyway, John Carew.
Yes, very good.
Now he ended his career in 2012 at West Ham.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
He's gone on to have an illustrious acting career.
Has he? I did not know that.
Including a role in a Canadian horror film.
Oh, gosh.
And he played the role of a jungle warrior in Disney's Maleficent.
Wow.
So he's making moves, John Carew.
He's making, goodness me, doing his thing. Well, fair play, John Carew.
Fair play, John Carew.
The 1 goal he scored for Stoke, by the way, was awful. It was a classic big man up top, bundle at the far post. Awful goal.
That's what we love to see.
Yeah, get it on YouTube. But thank you for listening to The Big Man Up Top. If you want to get in touch with the show, please ping us an email to podcasts@ucb.co.uk. Make sure you send us your FA Cup memories. We really want to hear them. Please follow, subscribe, give us good reviews, etc. This will help us to get the word out. And most importantly, if you've enjoyed this, tell your friends. Also, a huge thank you to our producer, Anthony Selmack-Webb, for all his hard work behind the scenes, although he's on holiday at the moment. There will be a new episode next Tuesday, Joe.
Yes.
So we'll see you next week.
See you next week.